5、9. 西方社会堕落的神学与思想根源，背离上帝与新自由主义，批判西方学者，原文罗列。5.9. The roots of Western decline. Turning away from God and neoliberalism, Western scholars. Exact quotes. 1. John Milbank, 英国神学家激进正统派，著作 Theology and Social Theory. Beyond Secular Reason Blackwell, 1990. 核心观点 Neoliberalism is the fullest expression of secular modernity's rejection of divine order, replacing the common good with market logic and reducing humanity to Homo economicus. 2. Mary Eberstadt, 美国文化评论家，著作 How the West Really Lost God, A New Theory of Secularization, Rutgers University Press, 2013 17页。原文The collapse of the family and the erosion of religious faith form a mutually reinforcing spiral. Neoliberal. Individualism, consumerism, and moral relativism have systematically dissolved the social bonds that sustained Christian life, leading to widespread secularization and moral disorder. 3. Kevin Hargaden 爱尔兰神学伦理学家著作 Theological Ethics in a Neoliberal Age Cascade Books, 2018年 P4. Neoliberalism is inherently idolatrous for Christianity, as it replaces devotion to God with the worship of wealth, competition, and self-interest, representing a systemic turning away from the divine. 4. Wendell Berry, 美国文化批评家、农学家，著作 The Unsettling of America, Sierra Club Books, 1977年第56页。原文 The modern economy, shaped by neoliberalism, has severed human work from divine purpose, reducing all value to money and all virtue to self-interest, betraying the Christian call to love neighbor and honor the sacred order. 5. Slavoj Žižek, 斯洛文尼亚哲学家，著作 Living in the End Times Verso, 2010年 P 124. Neoliberal freedom is false freedom. It frees individuals from community and religious duty, only to enslave them to the market and endless competition, representing the ultimate moral nihilism after the death of God. 6. Patrick Deneen, 美国政治理论家 Why Liberalism Failed 著作 Why Liberalism Failed Yale University Press, 2018年 P 129. Liberalism in its neoliberal form has exhausted itself by rejecting the transcendent foundations of Western civilization. God, tradition, virtue, and reducing life to individual choice and market exchange, producing a culture of loneliness, decadence, and collapse. 5. 使两大文明的暴力与堕落根源，基督教文明的祛魅放纵与伊斯兰文明的排他极端。5. 10. Roots of violence and decadence in two civilizations, disenchantment and licentiousness in Christian civilization versus exclusivism and extremism in Islamic civilization. The modern decadence of Christian civilization is prominently manifested in the widespread prevalence of pornography and violence. ITS roots lie in turning away from God and the full expansion of neoliberal values. The traditional sacred order has been dissolved, moral boundaries eroded, and desire, competition, and self-interest rationalized. This ultimately gives rise to a typical Asuric temperament, endowed with fortune yet devoid of virtue, powerful yet dissolute, aggressive yet lacking reverence. A civilization that has declined by turning away from the sacred. In sharp contrast, the extremism and violent tendencies that appear in the Islamic world do not stem from neglect or abandonment of doctrine. Instead, they often come from an overly rigid and radicalized interpretation of the narrow, tough, and exclusivist dimensions of its teachings. Islamic civilization places a high value on family, communal solidarity, religious authority, and ethical restraint internally, resulting in a far more integrated and cohesive social structure than the West. However, its extremist manifestations precisely come from the amplification of strongly exclusivist, boundary drawing, and confrontational elements in its doctrinal tradition. Under the impact of modernity, rising identity anxiety, and intensified external pressure, it moves toward closure, confrontation, and violence. In short, the problem of Christian civilization is decadence through abandoning the sacred and indulging desire. The problem of Islamic extremism is narrow-mindedness through clinging to the sacred yet falling into exclusivism. The former shows Asuric-style decadence through disenchantment, nihilism, and indulgence. The latter slides into extremist violence through exclusivism, antagonism, and rigidity. The two take opposite paths, yet both exacerbate conflict, division, and the overall predicament of human civilization at the level of collective karma. 6. 当代西方顶级学者对自由主义的批判与佛教东方救治方案权威著作。原文章节核心观点一 Arnold J. Toynbee 1889 1975 1. 阿诺德·汤因比 Status The greatest historian of the 20th century, founder of civilizational morphology, ranked alongside Spengler as the benchmark of Toynbee class scholarship. Works 1. A Study of History 1934到1961年 Volume X Type pp 587到598 Mankind and Mother Earth 1976 Chi 14 pp 312到315 1. Experiences of a Citizen 1961第7章第189页到第194页 Core Quotations Argument 1. The fundamental malady of modern Western civilization lies in atomistic individualism and value nihilism. Liberalism uproots the individual from community, tradition, faith, and history, ultimately leading to internal self-disintegration of civilization identical to the decline of the late Roman Empire. A Study of History, Volume 12, 592 R. The path forward for human civilization in the 21st century lies not in the West, but in the East. Not in liberalism, but in the synthesis of Mahayana Buddhism and Confucian communitarian ethics. Mankind and Mother Earth, p. 314. 3. Buddhist doctrines of dependent origination, emptiness of inherent existence, non-self, and universal compassion as one body can utterly dismantle the West's fundamental attachments to egocentrism, subject-object dualism, and the opposition between individual and society, and rebuild a communal consciousness of mutual interdependence among humanity. Experiences of a Citizen, p. 191 position. From the perspective of global civilizational history, Toynbee judges that liberalism inevitably leads to civilizational collapse and explicitly identifies Buddhism as the sole ultimate antidote to Western civilization. 2. Alastair MacIntyre 1929到 Alastair 麦金泰尔 The preeminent scholar of contemporary virtue ethics, a pillar of conservative communitarian thought, and the most systematic and profound top-level critic of liberalism. Works 1. After Virtue 1981年第2版第18章第234页到246页 Whose Justice? Which Rationality? 1988 Chand 19 pp 356到368 Core Quotations Arguments 1. Modern liberalism has collapsed into moral emotivism. All value judgments are reduced to subjective preferences, the common good disappears entirely, society is left only with a struggle of rights, interests, and the traditional virtue order collapses comprehensively. After Virtue, p. 239 3. The non-dual, middle way, and interdependent wisdom of Buddhism can remedy the fatal flaws of Western rationalism and individualism, ensuring that freedom does not degenerate into license and order does not harden into rigidity. Whose Justice? Which Rationality? p. 362. Positioned from the foundational level of moral philosophy, MacIntyre pronounces the failure of liberalism and explicitly upholds Buddhist wisdom as a critical resource for the reconstruction of Western virtue. Dr. Patrick J. Denning 1964至3帕特里克德宁 Status Leading scholar of contemporary American conservatism, his Why Liberalism Failed caused a global intellectual shock, directly exposing liberalism's internal logic of self-destruction. Works Why Liberalism Failed 2018 Chan 6 pp 112到128 Change 9 pp 176到190 Core Quotations Arguments 1. Liberalism begins with the liberation of the individual and ends with the dissolution of the family, the erosion of community, the hollowing out of tradition, and the destruction of the common life. Its logic necessarily leads to nihilism, division, and civilizational collapse. Why liberalism failed, p. 118 R. If Western civilization is to save itself, it cannot merely return to Christian conservatism. It must learn from the East, especially absorbing the Buddhist wisdom of the two truths, the middle way, non-self, and universal interconnectedness, to balance individual freedom and the common good. Why liberalism failed, p. 182 3. The Buddhist middle way, which upholds conventional truth without abandoning it, and ultimate truth without clinging to it, and which teaches the non-duality of emptiness and form, precisely counters both the extreme individualism of liberalism and the extreme rigidity of conservatism, providing the only viable integrative framework for human civilization. Why liberalism failed, P.E. positioned the most direct and explicit top-tier contemporary scholar to combine an Eastern Buddhist framework with conservative remedies for liberalism.